Comey. To me, Jim is a friend, a mentor, and a confidant. A person I respect and admire for his public service and accomplishments in the corporate sector. Jim began his career in the public sector as the managing assistant United States Attorney in Richmond, Virginia, where he had a focus on violent crimes and public corruption. Next, Jim served as the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, where he prosecuted organized crime and insider trading. Thereafter, Jim became the United States Deputy Attorney General in the Department of Justice. After positions in the private sector, Jim was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, where he led an organization of over 35,000 dedicated law enforcement professionals. Jim has written 2 books on leadership, 2 very, very good books, and a TV miniseries called The Comey Rule was based on his book, A Higher Loyalty, Truth, Lies, and Leadership. Jim and I worked for 5 years together at Lockheed Martin. This is where I got to know the competitive side of Jim Comey. As he told me that in law school at the University of Chicago, he was the big man in Park League basketball at 65th Street and Racine Avenue. No doubt Jim was the tallest guy playing. He's 6 feet 8 inches. But really, this was not Rucker Park in Upper Manhattan, Jim. When we played golf together, each of us would invite a friend, so we had teammates for a friendly competition. I would invite a fellow Lockheed Martin lawyer who wanted to know Jim a bit better and have a nice social afternoon. Jim always invited a friend whom Jim said had a special expertise in the law that we needed to know a little bit more about. This legal scholar friend of Jim's invariably stepped to the first tee and hit the ball 250 yards straight down the middle. So much for a friendly game with friends. Now back to when Jim was the U.S. Deputy Attorney General. Jim's boss, John Ashcroft, was in the intensive care unit at George Washington University Hospital, and Jim was the acting Attorney General. The authority for a classified surveillance program was about to expire, and Jim had advised the White House that he was not going to sign off on continuing the authority due to legal concerns. Late in the evening, the day before the authority was to expire, the White House Chief of Staff and the White House Legal Counsel arrived in Ashcroft's ICU room and squared off with Comey and Ashcroft. The White House team had the authority ready for Ashcroft signing for legality. Ashcroft, quite ill, advised that he was not the Attorney General and it was Jim's decision. The authority was not signed that evening for legality. Jim, in a tense situation, facing intimidation and compromise by the White House, uphold the rule of law, something that he has done during his entire career and something that we, his colleagues in the nation, are very proud of. Let me ask you to virtually join me in providing a warm Arizona State University School of Law welcome to our keynote speaker, my friend, Jim Comey.
Thank you, Les. Much of what you said was true. I won't go through the small parts that may be an exaggeration of my efforts to beat you at golf, which I don't remember them being successful. Thank you for having me here. I want to thank the law school. I want to thank Les. I'm sorry that here is my basement in Virginia. I'm sorry that we are not meeting. I'm sorry that we're meeting this way. I'm sorry for the pain and the anxiety and the loss that all of you have dealt with over the last 2 years. All of us have stories to tell. I'm just sorry that you're dealing with this. I am optimistic for our profession, for America, for the world. I think we're about to enter a very, very exciting time, but we are not there yet, and for that I am sorry. I want to talk today, though, about why I'm optimistic about that world, a world of turbulence and difficulty, a world where over recent years we've seen horrible leadership, not just in government, but in the private sector, in all parts, in academia, in healthcare, in nonprofit, all over the place. We've seen bad people rising to positions of power, and I've experienced some of it personally. And my great worry for this period of America's life and of the world's is that what if that becomes the norm? What if, especially young people, decide it's just too hard to be a leader, it's too hard to participate in that nonsense, I'll find something else to do with my talents and let that alone. And my worry was if that were to happen, we would be lost in a long-term way. Well, I'm going to end today my brief remarks by being optimistic, but I'll preview that. That hasn't happened. Young people have stepped forward. I think our profession, the legal profession, has been energized by a lot of what it's seen in recent years. And I think we are seeing an emerging focus on ethical leadership. And I think lawyers are uniquely qualified by virtue of their experience and their training to be advisors to ethical leaders and to be ethical leaders themselves. And let me explain to you why I believe that. But first, let me address something that Les mentioned. I am indeed 6 feet 8 inches tall. When I'm in supermarkets wearing my mask, as I always do, especially as the grandfather of 3 grandkids under the age of 2 who are not yet vaccinated, I try to be very, very careful. And I figure that gives me a certain measure of anonymity. I often lament to my children that I never want to be a celebrity. And I say to them, especially one of these B-list celebrities, and they say, Dad, seriously? You're not B-list, you're C, maybe D-list celebrity. But wherever I am, it's slowly fading, I'm dropping down the list. But it doesn't quite go away, because even with my mask on, people come up to me in the supermarket. Invariably, the haters tend not to come up to me, and I gather there are some haters out there. But the non-haters come up, and it won't surprise you, given all that's been in the news the last 4 or 5 years, that the first thing they ask is, oh my God, how tall are you? So as Les said, I'm 6'8". And the weird thing about me is in my head, I'm not that tall. One of the things I like about Zoom is I'm sitting down. My little head is the size of all of your little heads. But I am in real life very tall. Excuse me. And the reason I don't think I'm tall is I wasn't tall as a kid. I graduated high school, got my license at the middle of my senior year of high school at 5'11", and then graduated at 6'3" and grew after high school. So I'm a normal sized person in my head. And I often forget that I'm a giraffe. And I'll tell you one quick story that illustrates that. As Les mentioned, I had the privilege to be the Deputy Attorney General during the George W. Bush administration. So for 2 years, I was the number 2 at the Department of Justice, while John Ashcroft was the number 1, the Attorney General. And as the number 2, I had to go an awful lot to the White House to meetings, especially meetings that the Attorney General didn't want to go to. And I didn't get to go to a lot of fancy meetings in the Oval Office. I was there a fair amount, but most of my work was in the basement, where the White House Situation Room is, where the United States Security Council, the President's Security Council, has its offices. And you've seen, maybe on a tour or maybe on TV, the Oval Office with its incredibly high ceilings. And you may not know this, but it appears that the architects got the inches for those really high ceilings by taking them from the basement. There are rooms down there where I literally cannot stand up. And so I'll tell you a story. I was not a person of means when I was in the government. And so as the dad of 5 kids, when my shoes got worn out, we didn't buy new shoes. We rehealed or resold the existing shoes. And so one day I was on my way to the White House, forgetting that I was wearing a new pair of Rockports that had just, not new, but old, that had been rehealed and resold. And I'm late for a meeting with the President of the United States down in the low ceiling Situation Room complex. And so I tell my security team, we really got to hurry. And they barrel through different sets of gates in the armored Suburban they drove me around in. And we pull up next to the entrance, which goes into the basement off of what's called West Executive Drive. And I jump out and I'm walking at top giraffe speed and I pass a Secret Service agent. And I didn't realize that I had calibrated my ducking, because I said there are rooms where I can't stand up. Well, that means, as you would guess, the door frames are quite a bit lower than that. And I didn't realize how finely calibrated the ducking was until I tried to race through wearing newly rehealed and resold Rockports this morning. And I hit my head so hard on the door frame to go in to meet the president that I rocked backwards. And the Secret Service agent saw this and said, "Sir, are you okay?" I said, "Yes." I lied. I said, yes, I'm fine. And I rolled in and I got into the Situation Room ahead of the president, a good thing. And I sat down. President came in, we all rose, then we sat back down. And I was sitting in this very small room, despite what you've seen on television, the sit room is small. And I was 2 seats from the president. And we had a meeting for 45 minutes, chaired by the president, and I have absolutely no recollection of that meeting, of its subject. And not because I was concussed, because I was distracted. Because the meeting begins, and as it begins, I start to feel warm liquid on my scalp. And I realize, oh man, I'm bleeding. And so I did what I think any normal person would do. I started tilting my head to keep the blood from running out of my hairline to disguise it from the president. So throughout the meeting, I looked up, then I looked down, then I looked to the side. I have no idea what the man thought of me during that meeting, but no blood left that hairline. He had no idea that I'd been injured on my way in. And then I went home and told my wife this story, and she said, "You tell that story like that's a good thing. That's a weird, weird thing to do." I still disagree, even though I love her very, very much. I'm 6 feet 8 inches tall. I don't feel tall, but I am that tall. Done. Okay. Now I want to talk about leadership, and I want to explain to you why I've been on a mission these last 4 years to talk constantly about leadership, especially at universities and law schools, and especially about something that I call ethical leadership. But to tell you what I want to tell you, I got to start at the beginning. How did I get on this mission? Well, I got fired. I got fired in May of 2017. And here's something that may surprise you. I didn't expect to get fired. I know that seems weird in hindsight, but I was in the 4th year of a 10-year term, which Congress gives the FBI director as a symbol. The president can still fire the FBI director. That makes good legal sense to me as a part of our constitutional order. But it was a symbol of something that the American people wanted after Watergate. The first FBI director, I was the 7th. The first had served for 50 years, too long. So Congress passed a law that said it shall be a 10-year term to accomplish 2 objectives: to cabin the term of a director so no one serves that long and becomes too powerful, but to make it 10 years as a symbol that this ought to be beyond politics. This ought to be beyond the 2 terms of any president, because it sits apart. It's in the executive branch, but we don't want the FBI ever to be entirely of the executive branch as a matter of culture, spiritually, even though it is legally in the executive branch. That investigative power has to be at some distance from the executive power that resides in the presidents, all of which I'm sure makes good sense to you. It had been part of my lifeblood before I became FBI director, and it was so stressed to me by Republicans and Democrats when I was confirmed that I thought, I got a 10-year term. I'm going to try and do a lot in that decade, but I have job security. And also I thought, well, I'm running the Russia investigation. We're trying to understand who, if any, Americans were assisting the Russians in their effort to help elect Donald Trump. But there's no dispute that there was such an effort. The question was, did any Americans assist it? If so, who were they? And is there a sufficient basis to charge them with any crimes for participating in assisting that enemy's assault on our democracy? And so it didn't occur to me on May the 9th of 2017 that the day might end with me getting fired I was in Los Angeles that day. I'd woken up in my bed in the DC area, and only in the FBI is Jacksonville, Florida, on the way to Los Angeles. But I flew to Jacksonville that morning, did meetings with my folks there, then flew to Los Angeles, and still got there early for my intended purpose in Los Angeles, which was to change the FBI. I was there to try and deal with what I saw as an emergency, as a crisis in the FBI. 83%, when I became director, of our special agents were white, non-Hispanic, Caucasian. There's nothing wrong with white people, nothing wrong with tall, awkward white people from the New York metropolitan area. But as our country became more complicated, more diverse, in my view, more wonderful, the FBI was becoming more and more like me. Steadily, that percentage had been rising for over a decade. And I saw it as a threat. Obviously, there's a moral imperative to be diverse when you're enforcing the nation's laws, but there's a practical imperative. We can't be as effective as we need to be in protecting the American people if everybody looks like me. And so one of the things I hope to do in those 10 years is change that. And it wasn't because there wasn't talent out there. It's just I thought that these talented people of color and women, another challenge we face, just don't realize that they ought to take an enormous cut in pay, suffer life-challenging stress, risk their very lives to serve the FBI. And then if we could just show them what a cool thing it is to do, they would want to be part of it, and show them the kind of family the FBI was. The cool thing about the FBI is almost no one leaves. No matter what you look like, who you love, how you worship, it doesn't matter. When you join that family and become addicted to that mission, almost nobody leaves. That's the great news. The challenge was not enough people realized that and were trying to become part of it. And so I had figured out that, yeah, we needed slicker web presence. We needed better brochures. What we needed most of all was to get in front of talented young people who were underrepresented in the FBI and say, you ought to be part of this, and here's why. And I had done it in DC, I'd done it in Houston, and the yield was tremendous. And the biggest of them all was the night of May the 9th in Los Angeles. Hundreds of people were going to be gathering, young lawyers, young engineers, young MBAs, and I was going to walk out of there with half of them. I guarantee this was going to happen. Half of them applying to be special agents of the FBI. And given their talent, the yield would be off the charts. And so I was fired up, but I got there early. So I did what I always liked a boss to do, even when I didn't feel like it. And I'm a bit of an introvert. I'm a socially adept introvert. So I don't get energy from interacting with crowds or people, but it's a really important part of leadership. So I walked around the LA field office, shaking hands. People standing in their suits in a relaxed way at their cubicles while I shook their hands and thanked them for their work. Hundreds of folks. And then it turned out that there were people that I hadn't thought of, and I'm embarrassed to say I hadn't thought of them. But the leader of the FBI in Los Angeles, a woman named Deirdre Fike, who I had picked for that job, she thought of them. The janitors, the people who didn't have desks, wouldn't get to shake my hand unless she did something special. So she gathered the custodial staff, some of the security staff, the radio room people, all in a big training room for me to talk to and to thank. And so that's where I was when I found that I was fired. I was talking to them, giving them a speech, not a speech, but a chat about why this work mattered so much, how glad I was they'd chosen to do this. When I looked up, and on the back of the training room were televisions with the volumes off on 3 major news channels. And all of a sudden I saw a crawl across the screen that said, Comey resigns. And I don't know if you all know people in the FBI, but it's a pretty hilarious bunch. Practical jokes are a big thing in the FBI. You need that to lighten some of the load. And I thought it was a scam. And I turned to the leadership of the LA office, which was off to my side, and I said, that took a lot of work. But I don't know how you are with practical jokes, but I think it's important to be a good sport, but not let them totally triumph by throwing you off. So I just kept rolling, and I kept talking to the people, ignoring that crawl, figuring it was a joke. And then I saw the crawl change to Comey fired. And I knew that my beloved LA field office would not make that a joke. And so I started to get thrown off, and the folks that I was talking to started turning around, looking at the TVs. And I finally said, look, I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm going to go find out. But let me just end by thanking you for being part of this organization, which has a moral purpose to try and do good to protect the American people. And then I shook all of their hands, and then I went into a small room on the other side. On the way in, my cell phone rings. It's my wife saying, have you been fired? And I said, I don't know. Nobody called. I mean, you might imagine the FBI director travels with all kinds of communications gear. They could reach me any hour of the day or night, secure or unsecure. They could speak to me. They could send me documents. All the things you would want the FBI director to have in terms of comms, I had, and none of them were used. And so I said to Patrice, look, I don't know. I'm going to find out. I'll call you back. And she said, well, the kids say it's all over the internet. I said, I don't know. And so I went in. To make a long story short, I found out that I had been fired. A guy had come after the media was told and knocked on the door of the FBI, which is not something that one does. It's not a door that we opened. And the FBI police thought it was some wingnut, and they were about to send him away when he convinced them that he had a letter for me. About distraction because the media would fight. And I shook hands, spoke to people, got permission from the general counsel for me to travel home on the FBI aircraft, and I left. And I sat on that FBI plane and broke a rule. You can't have alcohol on FBI aircraft. I had a bottle of Pinot Noir from California that had been given to me out there. And I opened it and started drinking lovely Pinot Noir, I think North Coast, from a paper cup. I was numb. I felt like I'd been pushed off a bullet train and the train was gone. And all of a sudden it was very quiet. My security detail was teary-eyed. The pilots were teary-eyed, making me teary-eyed. But I thought, wow, now what am I going to do? And I got home and moped around for a few days. And it was my amazing spouse who started me thinking about how I could still be useful. She kept saying, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I knew what she meant because I had learned a lesson from her in the worst thing that's ever happened to me, the death of a child. When our son Colin died, Patrice over and over again said, I have to make good come of this. I can't ever bring my son back, but if I can spare another mother the pain I feel now, I will have been useful. And she never believed that doing good after a loss was about making the loss somehow justified. You can't justify losses like that. And it was something that stayed with me as a leader. When I was the US Attorney in Manhattan and had to speak to victims of 9/11, to law enforcement in the pit at 9/11, I said, look, I don't know why bad things happen to good people. I struggle to explain it, but I know our obligation, if we're going to go on living, is to make sure that evil does not hold the field, to make sure that something good follows bad, not to make it worth it, but because that's what it means to seek meaning in life. And I watched my wife do that after Colin died and do tremendous good to help change medical practice in the United States. And so I knew what she meant, but she said, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Had to find something good to do to follow this. And ultimately I decided that where I could be useful, I went up to her and said, you know what? I'm worried that people will withdraw from trying to be leaders in this country. They're seeing a lot of badness now. I think I'd like to talk and write about leadership. And she said, that's great. How are you going to do that? And I said, well, I'll write a book. She said, that'll be boring. And I said, well, I'll try to write a book that's interesting, a little bit fun for people. And I'll try to speak in a way that's not boring leadership talk, that maybe I can hold enough interest to be useful. And so that's what I set out to do. And when I talk about leadership, I want to first define my terms. Then I want to explain what I mean when I say ethical leadership. Then I want to tell you why you and I, as lawyers, are uniquely suited to be ethical leaders. So what do I mean by leadership? I don't mean management. And this is just my own framework, but I believe that management is an arithmetic exercise. You manage work, you lead people. And management is a really important part of being a leadership. It's indispensable to being a leader, but it's a soulless exercise because management is about schedules and resources and Gantt charts and metrics and stoplight charts and things that used to give me a rash. And then at Lockheed Martin, I learned a lot about it and became a better leader by becoming a better manager. But as I said, if all you are is a manager, you're not a leader. The piece that is leadership, that turns a manager into a leader, is harder to define, and a little bit gushy, which is why we often default to talking about management as if that's leadership. But what leadership is an ability to take those people who are doing that work that you're measuring and somehow knit them into a group that can accomplish more than they ever imagined. It's about taking individuals and helping them accomplish more than they could imagine, about helping them fulfill their potential. It's about painting a vision for people of where we're going and helping get them there, not by yelling go, but by saying, come on, everybody, let's do this. It's about meaning and purpose and connectedness. It's about communication. You can see why it's so hard to talk about and why we so often then talk about schedules and metrics and how we're going to get the stuff done. Leadership boils down, in my experience, to a very small set of attributes. I actually think 4 in 2 pairs. The best coaches, teachers, parents, leaders I have ever known had 2 sets of attributes. They were kind and tough. They were confident and humble. And those 2 pairs seem like contradictions, but I think it'll make sense to you when you think about the people who got you here. Take kind and tough. If you were on this Zoom, you had someone in your life when you were young who loved you enough to kick you in the pants, who loved you enough to insist that you be better, that you grow, that you learn, that you challenge yourself. I know I did. I have many weaknesses, I have many strengths. Let me talk about weaknesses for a second. One of my weaknesses was long inability to convince myself that what I had done was awesome. Drop the mic, I nailed that, dance away. I am so fortunate that I had parents, coaches, teachers, bosses who said, no, it's crap. You can do so much better than that. You can run farther than that. You can think better than that. You can be a better person than that. So get your lazy rear end back in the gym, back in the library, back in the chapel. You are settling and we will not let you settle. My parents were report card on the refrigerator people. And you have to picture this. 4 kids in my family. After each marking period, my mother with a little magnet would put the report cards on the refrigerator. And the worse yours was compared to your siblings, the higher it seemed to be on the refrigerator. So that every time for a full marking period that your siblings went to get milk, they saw your grades. And that seems cruel, I guess, when I describe it, but it actually didn't feel that way because it was delivered in an atmosphere of unconditional love. It was delivered in an atmosphere where I knew where it was coming from. They cared deeply about us being something. My mother and father used to snap the shades open every morning in our rooms with the same obnoxious phrase, time to rise and shine and show the world what you're made of. I can still hear it. I just heard the shades snap open. But it wasn't as crazy as it may sound from this distance, again, because of where it came from. They had immigrant mentality, which is you will be better than those who came before you, who didn't have the chance for an education, for a job. You have gotten a gift and you will pay it back by being better, more advanced, more accomplished than those who came before you because they didn't get those chances. Kindness and toughness. I don't know about you, but I've always understood that a whipped horse, toughness alone is dysfunctional. It gets you a few laps on that horse, but then beating the horse gets you nothing in the long run. That seems obvious. But I actually believe that the other part of the pair alone, kindness, is also dysfunctional and in some ways worse, because kindness alone is so dangerous and its consequence is so severe. It's dangerous because it feels so great. I love being told I'm awesome. I wish there were more people following me around my basement telling me I was awesome. But it feels so good, it's seductive and dangerous because where it will get you is to one of the great tragedies of human experience, which is unfulfilled potential. Getting to the end of a life, never having been what you might have been. And I would have been one of those people if people didn't love me enough to kick me in the pants. And so kindness and toughness together is necessary for effective leadership. I had a really awkward dinner with Donald Trump in the first month of his presidency, actually the Friday at the end of his first full week. I was invited to a dinner at the White House that I thought was a group dinner. And I freaked out when I got to the green room in the residence, the main floor of the residence, and discovered there was just 2 places at the little table in the middle of the room. All the furniture had been cleared to the sides. And then began a really weird dinner where the president, who had multiple times before this said, I hope you're going to stay, and I had assured him I do intend to serve out my 10-year term, asked me directly in exchange for my keeping my job for my loyalty. And it freaked me out so much that all I could think of to do was stare at the man. And I don't know how you are at staring. I'm not a great starer, especially when I'm alone in the green room staring across a salad at the President of the United States. But it's all I could think of to do. And so I just looked at the man, 1, 2, 3. And then he looked down at his salad and broke the silence and moved on to something else, then came back to it. And I was a little better equipped when he came back. But in that first moment of staring, I knew 2 things. I knew that this president doesn't care about the culture that the American people want in the executive branch to separate the power of the FBI from the president. Not that the president can't fire the director of the FBI, but that he can't make the director of the FBI his personal investigator, part of his personal patronage team. And second, I knew in that moment that this man doesn't know anything about leadership, because a good leader never asks for loyalty. A good leader doesn't have to. There was, in the Trump administration, a really good leader as Secretary of Defense. I didn't used to speak his name in public while he was still in office because I didn't want President Trump to find out I was an admirer of his, but a fellow named Jim Mattis, who spent 40 years in the United States Marine Corps. And I guarantee you that in that time, he never asked any Marine for loyalty. Instead, he gave. He gave them sleep before he got it. He gave them food always before he got it. He gave them the best equipment. He gave, he gave, he gave. The only thing he demanded in return was that they meet his high standards. He loved them and he held them to high standards. Now, in return, he got something more valuable than loyalty. He got love from thousands and thousands of Marines. But a true leader, someone seeking to embody that combination of kindness and toughness, doesn't ask for loyalty. Never would ask for loyalty. So I become FBI director, and I think, all right, I got this now. Kindness and toughness. The toughness piece is easy, actually very easy, because all you got to do is wait for people to do things they shouldn't do and hit them hard and make sure that people find out about it. And the challenge of the FBI is, as Les said, there's 35,000 people. Every day in a group of 35,000, somebody is doing something they shouldn't do. And so it's easy to be tough and to enforce the rules in a way that people hear about. The harder part is the kindness piece, because there's a worry on the part of all leaders that kindness will be mistaken for weakness. I'm leader of the FBI. What do you mean kindness? What do you mean atmosphere of love, mutual consideration? What the heck are you talking about? I knew how important it was. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about ways to do it. And I won't tell you about all of them. I'll just tell you about one. Every single day that I was in Washington, I almost never had time for lunch. I would eat at my desk, but I decided I got to go get the food myself. And I've got to walk there without my jacket on, which is a big deal in the FBI. I tried actually one day not wearing a tie, and it threw the whole organization into a tailspin. So I put the tie back on, but with my jacket off, asking my security team to please stay back. I love you all and I appreciate what you do for me, but I don't want people to think I need to be protected from my people. And so I asked them to stay out of sight, and I went by myself to the enormous cafeteria, and I walked in, I went over to the sandwich line where they said sandwiches and wraps, and I stood in line, and I refused invitations to cut the line. What was I doing? I'm trying to symbolize something, show something. I am with you. I am not above you. I'm not some sort of fancy pants leader. I will wait in line just as you have to wait in line. I didn't really have time to wait in line, but I tried to use that time productively by asking people in line questions. Why'd you come to the FBI? What do you like? What don't you like? Tell me about yourself. Give me your story. Well, one day I'm waiting there after I've been director for a year, and I'm 6'8". And I'm standing there talking to a woman in front of me, and I ask her all these questions. And when I finish my little interview of her, the line is moving forward. So I turn around, and the line always took forever after they added a panini machine. I have no idea why they added a panini machine to that line, but that takes forever. And so I turn to the guy behind me, and I start asking him the questions. And I find out that he's been with the FBI for 4 years. He's a computer expert. He's not a special agent. He works on servers on one of the high floors. He loves his work. He loves it because he gets responsibility he might not get in the private sector. And he loves the mission of the FBI. And tells me his story, and then there's an awkward pause. And he says, "How about yourself?" And I said, "I'm the director." And he looks at me and goes, "Director of..." And I paused and I said, "Dude, I'm the director of the FBI. You work for me." And he says, quote, "Oh man, you look so different on television." Okay. And so I'm hoping the answer was just because on television I look teeny on his little computer screen. I suspected something more hurtful than that. I went home and told my wife that story, and she said, "That should happen to you every single day. That's so good for you." Well, it didn't happen every day, but it happened enough that she was pleased. I was trying to show kindness and decency, which was harder than the tough part. Kindness and toughness. Okay, excuse me. The second pairing, weirder in some ways, confidence and humility. Think about the people who coached you, who taught you. Think about your folks. Think about the great bosses you had. What were they like? I guarantee they were people who had confidence. They were comfortable enough in their own skin to manifest humility in two really important ways. They were comfortable enough in their own skin to take joy in you and your achievements. The best leaders do not want to be center stage. They would rather be off in the wings watching you. The best coaches, the best teachers, they want you to succeed. Now, a marker of an imbalance there are those who won't do that. And I don't know about you all, but I have 5 kids and I've been to a lot of kids sporting events, team sports. And standing on the sideline, I saw dysfunction that I hadn't witnessed because I had really good parents. I saw parents appearing to be threatened by their children's achievements, who appeared to resent that their kids were doing something really well. I think the way we're supposed to be as parents is taking joy in that. Oh my gosh, hoping that our kids will be better than we at everything. Right? My oldest child, my daughter, is a federal prosecutor in Manhattan. She just led the prosecution of a woman named Ghislaine Maxwell, who was a partner of Jeffrey Epstein in abusing young girls. My daughter is better than I was. And man, does that make me happy. It is so wonderful to watch her. I think that's the way we're supposed to be as parents. But it takes a certain confidence to do that, because if you're insecure, you're threatened by that. You're threatened by them being better than you. A marker of whether someone, in my view, is an effective boss, coach, teacher, is looking at who they've spun off. Who came from being an assistant to that person and is now a leader, a coach of their own. I'm not a big fan of Alabama football. I was kind of pleased to see Georgia beat them in the national championship game. But I'm struck by the coach of Alabama, this fellow, Nick Saban, how many of his assistants have gone on to be head coaches. I think it's something like 9 right now. That's a marker of someone confident enough to develop his own people, to launch them into being something like he is and not being threatened by that. Confidence and humility, taking joy in your people. The second thing that confidence and humility allows you to do is shut up and listen to your people. Listen to your students, listen to your employees, even listen to your kids. This is a real challenge for insecure people, because just being quiet threatens the leader. Right? Think about it. I'm the director of the FBI. I sit at the top of a very, very steep hill, almost straight up, because the first director of the FBI created a fear-based culture where the FBI director is revered. And when I walk into a room, people rise. Not anymore, they don't, but when I was FBI director, they dress like they're going to a religious service. They speak with a catch in their throat when they speak to me. I'm a big deal. And so what happens when I ask a question that reveals I don't know something? I threaten myself. I threaten my big dealness, because I've just admitted I don't know everything. I don't know enough. That's the challenge of achieving this balance of confidence and humility, because just asking is a confession of weakness. Now, I've spent a lot of time in my life thinking and talking about listening, and I really do believe what a lot of leadership experts tell you, that it's the most important thing a leader does. But I actually never fully understood what listening was. I thought there were two states of the world that could be listening, and one obviously wasn't, and it was the second instead. The first state of the world is what I call the Washington listen. That's where I'm quiet while you talk before I say what I plan to say the entire time. Right? That's the candidate on the stool waiting for the light to go on so he can stand up and condemn his opponent for hurting working families or something, without even caring what the other person said. Those words, it's just silence without words reaching conscious mind. It's obvious that's not listening. And I knew that. I thought listening was the second state of the world, which was silence while you speak, and me actually thinking about your words, so that when I speak, I'm responding to you. I'm cognition around your words. And what I've come to realize, again, through the help I've gotten over almost 35 years from my spouse, is that listening is actually a third state of the world. It's silence, plus your words reaching my brain, plus a third thing that's weird and scary and hard for insecure people to do. It's a form of communication where I, the listener, communicate to you, give it to me, give it to me. I want it, give it to me, give it to me. I don't know whether you've ever had the chance to sit and watch two good friends talk about something that they really care about. And imagine yourself as a court stenographer trying to make a transcript of that interaction between those two good friends. It's impossible, because what's going on? They're not only talking over each other, they're making weird noises. One is speaking, the other's going, "Oh, I know. Oh, oh, you don't have to tell. 1,000. Oh no, 1,000." What's going on there? Push, pull. The listener is saying, "Give it to me, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me." And each of them is doing this, which creates that chaos. There is real listening going on there, even though there's weird noises. The listener is communicating. And so I've come to learn that what a leader has to do at the top of that hill is listen in that third state of the world way and communicate, "You're safe, give it to me. I need it, give it to me." Because the leader's obligation is to try to flatten the hill. The challenge of hills, that kind of topography, and they exist in all organizations. I know, I hear all the time about, "Oh no, I'm in Silicon Valley, we're sitting in beanbag chairs, eating trail mix and wearing hoodies, and we're drawing on whiteboards and everybody's the same." Yeah, right. If anybody in that room has authority that's different than anybody else, the hill slopes up towards that person. If they own more shares, it slopes up towards that person. If they have more expertise in a particular area, it slopes up towards that person. And if the person up that slope is going to hear the truth, especially about themselves, they have to find a way to flatten that hill. The challenge of hill flattening is that it is impeded by a universal human attribute called the imposter syndrome or imposter complex. That's the notion that if you knew me the way I know me, you would think less of me. If you knew me the way I know me, my strengths and my weaknesses, you wouldn't think I was all that. All of us have that to one degree or another. If you don't, you're an incredible jerk. I don't know why you're on this Zoom call, but if you have it, and all of us have some measure of it, a fear of exposure, you can see how it gets in the way of hill flattening. Because think about it, I'm at the top of the hill. The woman who just came into my office from the intelligence branch of the FBI to talk to me about cryptocurrency or something has devoted her life to understanding that subject. She is terrified of me. She is terrified of exposure, of me embarrassing her, of me threatening her. But I have the same complex because I'm at the top of the hill. I'm all that. Do I really want to reveal to these people I don't know anything about cryptocurrency? And if you explain it to me 3 times, I'm still not going to get it? Wow. My imposter complex gets in the way. Her imposter complex gets in the way. She knows that I could destroy her with a sound. When she's done briefing me on cryptocurrencies, I don't even need to say a word. I can just do this. Because if I do that, she's never going to recover from that. She knows that, I know that. It's a double bind. So how do we flatten the hill? The only person who can do it is the leader, who has to have enough confidence and humility to take the chances necessary to flatten that hill. And the most important way you do it is by listening in that third state of the world way. I did not know Barack Obama before I got called out of the blue in 2013 and asked to interview for the FBI director job. Still very glad, even though everything has happened, still glad they called me. It didn't occur to me that I would end up as FBI director, but I did. And I came to watch him up close. And I discovered that Barack Obama was the best listener as a leader I've ever seen. And I think that's a product of his extraordinary confidence. And if he has a weakness, it may be too much confidence, but his confidence allowed him to do something extraordinary. So picture the Oval Office. There's a big wooden desk, the Resolute desk, it's still there. And the president's work chair is at that desk with his back to the windows that look out onto the south lawn of the White House. And on the opposite end of the Oval Room is a fireplace. And in front of that fireplace are two wing chairs. And then there are couches on either side between the wing chairs and the big Resolute desk. President Obama never, ever had a meeting where he sat behind his desk with us. We had a national security meeting. He always sat where George W. Bush sat. It's like your parents' house at Thanksgiving. There's no place cards, but everybody knows what their seat is. He sat in the chair as you face the fireplace. Now I'm turning you around to the right. The vice president sat to the one on the left. And he would sit there. He would take off his jacket, and we're urged to the lead briefer, so in these cases me, to come and sit on the couch cushion nearest to him. And then he would turn and face me. He would open his shoulders. He'd address me by my first name, typically ask something, how you doing, Jim? How's it going? How's your family? And then after those pleasantries, he would say, so what do I need to know? And then he would be silent for 5 or 10 minutes. 5 or 10 minutes, the president of the United States would not speak. So I shouldn't have said silent, because he wouldn't be silent, he wouldn't speak, but he'd be making weird noises. He'd be going, He would be signaling to me, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. And he would never interrupt, because the president of the United States understood that if I interrupt, the hill gets steeper. And then the speaker's thinking, am I doing the wrong thing? Should I be saying something different? Should I move to another topic? Instead, he would listen, listen, listen. And I know he wasn't daydreaming about golf, because at the end of that 5 or 10 minutes, he would then ask questions drawn from minute 1, minute 7, minute 9. He'd been tracking the entire time, but he understood the danger. He was listening in that third state of the world sense, took real risks. Now contrast that with his successor, Donald Trump. And I was only there 5 months, but every meeting that I had with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, or that I've seen since when he was still president, he was behind the Resolute desk with his jacket on. And I didn't realize till later that it was because of his insecurity about his stomach, but whatever the reason, he's behind the desk. And the man almost never stopped talking. To tell him something, you had to interrupt. So then think of the topography. You're speaking up a hill, now there's a block of wood on the slope, and the president is speaking over the block of wood downhill at you. How is he going to hear the truth? Especially about himself, the hardest thing for a leader to hear. Confidence and humility. I believe that the first president I spoke about had a tremendous amount of humility born of confidence. The second president, deeply out of balance the other way, deeply insecure, and so unable to manifest the confidence to listen in that way. I'm FBI director. I started to obsess on this. How do I do it? And so I would turn and face. I'd ask people to tell me their story. I would take off my jacket. I would nod and make weird noises, all in an effort to flatten the hill so I can hear the truth. Kindness and toughness, confidence and humility. That is the set of attributes that you need to be a leader, to be something beyond a manager, to understand what it means to connect people to their work, to motivate them, to help them see purpose, to paint a vision, to knit a team together that does extraordinary things. Those simple attributes. Nearly all of us have them in some measure, but they can be cultivated and developed. Okay, so that's leadership. Now, I've used several times in talking to you this morning the term ethical leadership. And I said at the beginning that I'm going to explain to you why lawyers are uniquely suited to lead ethically, and why ethical leadership is exactly what we need in turbulent, difficult times. Here's what I mean by ethical leadership. I don't mean the answer to any particular problem. I don't mean the way in which a leader comes out on a decision. I'm sure I've made decisions you may disagree with. I totally respect that. But I will defend aggressively the ways in which the decisions were made. They were ethical decisions in the following sense. The right people were there. We thought about the right things. We considered everything that should be done to make a decision long-lasting and sustainable. We did three things that in my experience, and I didn't make any of this up, I've seen it in watching good people do it. We did three things that make leadership decisions ethical. We always lifted our eyes when under pressure. We got help, and we traveled in time. Here's what I mean by those three things. Lift your eyes. The challenge of making decisions when the shit is hitting the fan is that your near field tends to get dominated by lower level considerations, by anger, by the quarterly numbers, by fear, by hunger, by loyalty, friendship, by all of these things that dominate our day-to-day lives. Makes it very, very hard to ask this question. So what are the principles that should guide this decision in the long run? What are the values of this institution that I lead or that I represent? What are the precepts? What are the precedents? What is the history? What philosophy should guide us? Are there considerations of law, of practice? Are there guideposts that we ought to be looking at? Are there stars that will help us navigate? Those things are above. And it can be very, very hard to lift your eyes up and see those things. But that's where ethical decisions lie. Again, there's no perfect decision in the world, but that's where decisions that are made based on the right things that are sustainable, that's the path to those things. Now, Les mentioned the nightmare I went through in 2004 in the Bush administration in an incredible struggle over a surveillance program. And I hadn't realized what good training it was for nightmarish decisions. At the time, I thought that was the end of my career in government. And it was actually easier than you might think. I was summoned to a meeting during that week that the Attorney General was so desperately ill, and I was acting Attorney General. I was summoned to a meeting at the White House, in the White House Chief of Staff's office, which is just down the hall from the President's. And the White House Chief of Staff has a large conference room, a large conference table in his office. And I was invited to this meeting, chaired by the Vice President then, Dick Cheney. And Vice President Cheney sat at the head of the conference table while they made a presentation to me about why this program that the lawyers at the Department of Justice had advised me, and I agreed, we could not certify as to legality because there were significant parts of it that were unlawful, and there were significant parts of it that went beyond what even the president had authorized. But they want to make a pitch to me about why this was so important to our nation's security. And then they ushered the briefers out, and then it came time to hammer me. The Vice President turned to me and said, red-faced, he said, thousands of people are going to die because of what you're doing. And it kind of sucked the air out of the room, as you might imagine. And I paused and I said, Mr. Vice President, I don't want people to die. I devoted my entire career to trying to help innocent people and trying to protect this country. But my job is to say what the Department of Justice can support. And we just can't. We just can't say something's lawful that's just not lawful. And then there was the meeting at the next night at the bedside of John Ashcroft while they tried to see if they could get the desperately ill Attorney General to sign off. And when he refused, it ended up in a showdown between me and President George W. Bush alone in the president's private dining room on the day I was going to quit and that FBI Director Bob Mueller was going to quit. And the president tried to lean on me to urge me to, he wanted to lift the burden from me. He said, you look troubled. And I said, I am, Mr. President. I'm not sleeping well. And he said, let me take that burden from your shoulders. And I said, Mr. President, I wish I could give it to you, but I'll lead the Department of Justice. And he said, but I decide what the law is for the executive branch. And I believe that to be true. The president is the leader of the executive branch, and the Department of Justice works for him. And I said, Mr. President, that's true, but I decide what the Department of Justice can say, and we can't sign off on this. And we had this tremendous standoff, and I didn't give in. In fact, I helped him see that he'd been misled by his own advisors. And then he spoke to Director Mueller, who told him the same thing, and told him he really ought to listen to us. And the crisis was averted because George W. Bush finally saw what was true. But people have said to me, wow, I can't believe you stood up then. That was incredible. Wow, what strength you have. No. Because a group of lawyers at the Department of Justice had already helped me lift my eyes. We had already looked at the United States Constitution. We'd looked at acts of Congress. We'd looked at precedent. We looked at all the things we as lawyers are trained to look at above. And these smart people had come to a conclusion, no, we can't sign off on this. And how was I going to go back to the Department of Justice and say, yeah, I get all that, guys, but President, he was really emphatic, or Vice President Cheney was so mean to me. He was angry. And so I told him we could sign off on it. How would I ever do that? Once your eyes are above, the rest of it is noise in a way. And those great people helped me see the law clearly, the Constitution clearly, the values of the Department of Justice. And there's no going back once your eyes are fixed there. Now, it makes you a huge pain in the butt to people whose eyes are not fixed up there. So what? It's a decision. Those are decisions I'm still proud of all these long years later, because they were made in the right way. We lifted our eyes. Second, ethical leaders, in my experience, when the stuff is hitting the fan, they get help. What's the central challenge of my existence, including my existence as a leader? I'm trapped in me, right? I'm a straight white, I'm a 61 years old guy from the New York metropolitan area with a certain set of experiences. Great, wonderful. But those experiences make my interaction with reality looking through a soda straw. I see through a soda straw. So do you. The way good decisions are made is we find somehow a way to combine those soda straws so we have a clearer view of reality, of facts, of law, of the way in which a decision will be received, of a way in which a decision can be communicated so it reaches a variety of audiences, all of whom have their own soda straws. The only way to do that is to get around your table a group of people who will tell you the truth. Again, the hill gets in the way. Everybody's afraid, everybody's dressed up, no one wants to risk anything. I spent 4 years at the FBI trying to build a culture around my table where people would tell me the truth, especially about me. And I did that in a variety of ways, trying to praise people who did it. I had an executive one time help me avoid a classic leadership mistake. I rolled into a meeting with him and I said, thanks for the read-ahead material. I've studied it all. I always do my homework. I read it. Thanks, it was really helpful. Here's what I think we ought to do. What do you think? Rookie mistake. Because I'm at the top of this hill. And I just told him what I think we ought to do. Oh my God. To his great credit, he said, no, sir, actually, I don't think that's right. Here's what we ought to do. And he made the case. Well, I told that story all around the FBI over and over and over again. And I spent a lot of time trying to break down, flatten that hill, take a jackhammer to that hill. I did weird things like ask every FBI executive to tell me their favorite Halloween candy when they were a kid. I asked them to go around the room and share something about themselves that would surprise everybody in the room. And I said, but please let it not be something that jeopardizes your security clearance. I did all of this not to be silly. I did all of it to try and relax, to flatten that, knowing that there will come times when I need people to tell me I'm full of crap. I need people to tell me another one of my great weaknesses, which is I've often been impulsive, but told myself I'm being decisive. And I need people to say, whoa, wait a minute, stop. And I'm not going to hear that if the hill is steep. And so by the time we got to nightmare decisions around Hillary Clinton's emails or the Russia investigation, we had around that table at the FBI a group of people who were comfortable, never fully comfortable. There's always an upslope to the director, but who would say, nah, sir, you're totally missing that, or you got that wrong, or follow me into my office and say, holy cow, dude, you are missing it completely. I got help because I knew I needed help. My challenge at the FBI, given the makeup of the workforce, as I said, is finding enough different kinds of soda straws to get around that table who see the world differently. Need a flat environment plus different views of the world. Get help. And the third thing that ethical leaders do in my experience is travel in time. I spent a lot of time during that crisis over surveillance, 2004, asking myself, so how will I explain this when it inevitably becomes public someday? I hate leaks of classified information, always did. But here's a weird paradox. They made me a better leader, because knowing that everything we were doing would someday be in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, was frustrating, but it invited those newsrooms, those editorial rooms, into my room so that they were there when I was trying to make a decision. And I would spend time trying to imagine how that's going to go. And how will it go when I'm in front of Congress 3 years from now explaining this? How will this go 10 years from now when the National Archives has released a lot of this and I'm in front of a high school class trying to explain decisions? Will it work to say, you should have seen the vice president's face. Yeah, I know what they were doing, violated an act of Congress. There's no fuzz on that. I know that in Youngstown, the Supreme Court said that the president's power is at its low ebb when Congress has acted to occupy the field. And yeah, that happened here, but you should have seen Cheney's face. That is not going to work in a newspaper, in a congressional hearing room, or in a high school civics classroom. By traveling to those places and looking back on the moment, I got out of the noise. I got out of the low-level things, and it helped me lift my eyes. Because those classrooms, those hearing rooms, they don't want to know about the low-level things, that I was hungry or sleepy or afraid for my job. They want to know, so what were the stars by which you navigated? What are the things that mattered? So ethical leaders lift their eyes, get help, and travel in time. Okay, so here's why I began by saying lawyers are uniquely suited to be leaders themselves and make ethical decisions, or even if they don't want to be leaders, to be advisors to ethical leaders, to urge them to make decisions in the right way. Think about our education as lawyers, and then think about the practice that has followed. Start with lift your eyes. What do we spend law school doing? Being asked, so what are the principles here? What is at the top level? What is the tradition? What are the norms? What are the constitutional standards? What are the things above before we get to the contract, before the arbitration clause? Are there things that influence this decision at the top level? Our professors insisted that we start there. Lift your eyes. And we've also internalized the notion as lawyers that these kind of things matter. They matter to our profession, they matter to our lives. We've internalized the notion that we are a nation, if we are a civilized nation, that is ruled by law, not by people, that these standards matter, and that whether we agree or disagree with a court's decision, we respect it because that institution matters. So we have been trained, we have internalized, and we have lived the idea of lifting our eyes to find values, to find principles, to find what matters in an institution. Second, get help. What's the most difficult thing about law school? And I have a daughter who's a law student now, and I told her she's missing out on this, is when you walk out of class and your pain in the neck classmates follow you to the coffee place to tell you why you're an idiot, why you were wrong about this thing. Whether you want their help or not, they give it to you. They give it to you. I have worked in all kinds of environments, and I got a chance. Les mentioned the Comey rule. Still gives me, it's on Netflix now. I shudder to watch Jeff Daniels play me. First of all, he's way too short, and I told him that, but he said he can only act so tall. But one of the things I learned in Hollywood is a place where people don't always tell you the truth. People don't tell you when you have a piece of spinach in your teeth. Lawyers will tell you. Lawyers will tell you the truth. First of all, we're that kind of people, but we are trained in law school to want that help, The truth arrives in an adversary system from a collision of viewpoints. Cold calling is terrifying, but what is it? It's help being forced on us by a professor and our classmates. It happens over and over and over again. You learn to bounce ideas off of people, to give them feedback, to tell them when they have spinach in their teeth. They force that help on you. We have made that part of our profession. It is part of all of us who've chosen to be lawyers. We get help. Third, we travel in time. We started there in law school. Right? What did our professors do to us in law school? They'd say, okay, got it. What if this case was in the Fifth Circuit instead of the Ninth Circuit? What if this case was decided 5 years from now after the law has moved in the following direction? Take these facts and move them back to the Lochner era. Having said that, I'm not even sure I can explain what the Lochner era is. Bring it forward then. Move it here. What if this was in an international tribunal? How would you resolve that? What if you had to go to Japan with this challenge? They moved us around in time and place. We learned to do that without even realizing it. And then as practicing lawyers, we do it all the time. If this dispute ends up here, here's the way it's going to go. If the law moves in this way, we ought to think about it as we structure this entity, where it's going to end up. We are always traveling in time. Imagine being in a tribunal, imagine being with a particular judge, a particular arbitrator. We're thinking about regulators in different countries. We are moving ourselves around, especially the people on this Zoom call. And so when you think about it, we have devoted our education and our careers to lifting our eyes, to getting help, and to traveling in time. We are uniquely suited to make decisions in an ethical way. I hope you see that. I hope you feel that. I hope you lean forward, not defensively, but lean forward to help the people we advise. And if you lead an organization, to lead yourself, to help that organization make decisions that will stand the test of time. I am deeply optimistic about America and the world, because as I said at the beginning, I've seen the opposite of what I feared. I have seen young people engage. And I hear and read all the time about our country is going to hell. It's always been going to hell. It was really going to hell when I was a little kid. I try to remind people what the 1960s were like. The president was murdered. His blood was on his wife's pink suit. Martin Luther King was murdered. Malcolm X was murdered. 4 little girls were murdered at 16th Street Baptist Church at about the same time in Birmingham. The dead president's brother was murdered. There were bombs in our cities. Thousands of our young men were dying in a war nobody understood in Southeast Asia. Thousands of others were fleeing to Canada. This country of ours was coming apart, except it didn't come apart. America sustains. It's always been wacky and screwed up in our country. I shudder to explain that to people who are not from America. It always has. But there's a culture and a set of values that help us sustain, in part because of the energy of people who decide to be part of leadership. Hope you will decide to be those people, to be great leaders yourselves, or to help those you advise make sound decisions that will stand the test of time. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Comey, for your candid, heartfelt, moving, and inspiring remarks and your call to action regarding ethical leadership. I'd like to take the moderator's privilege and ask one question. Your candid stories have demonstrated not only that you've learned and demonstrated leadership throughout your career in life, but you've also been an excellent support person for several leaders. And most of us serve as both leaders and support persons for leaders in various aspects of our lives and work. Could you share some lessons for how to be a good member of the team, how to support the leader of your team, and how to navigate that hill as a support person?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for that. The first is to try and understand, what is this person like that I am supporting? And I've spent a lot of time, as you said, all of us have, supporting leaders, and not just as the general counsel of 2 companies, but in lots of other roles. The first is to try and understand, what are they like? What is the best way to connect with them, to communicate with them? How do they receive information? There's all different kinds of styles. How can I be most useful? And the biggest challenge is when you have a leader who needs to be better in some way, finding the way to help them become better without burning bridges with them. And so I advise young people all the time, look, if you've got a really crappy boss, give it a shot, avail yourself of anonymous climate surveys, that sort of thing. But the most important advice I can give you is get away and find a good boss. Find somebody who spins off people, who inspires people, who moves people, who wants to hear from you. The challenge is in between. There are great leaders and there are crappy leaders, a lot in between. My advice is figure out what your role is, what this leader is like, where do they best receive information. Sometimes they want it in a group, sometimes they want you to talk to them privately. Find the way that you will be able to be best able to get your advice that will help shape that leader to that leader. And that'll be different in all different cultures.
Thank you so much for that very helpful answer to the question, and I hope that's helpful for our audience. If you have a question, you can feel free to post it in the Q&A box, and I'll take a look and we'll pose a few questions. I'll just ask one more as a moderator's privilege as well. For folks out there who are contemplating becoming a leader, maybe they are in a position where a leadership opportunity may become available to them, or they're deciding whether or not to throw their hat in the ring for a leadership role. How do you decide whether it's time, whether you have what it takes to become an ethical leader in whatever organization you're part of?
In part because you become a leader when realizing that I could do it better. That I have a son, for example, who's a police officer. I tease him that he's the only philosophy graduate of Kenyon College ever to become a police officer. And he tells me that I don't want to be a leader. I just love being a police officer. And he's a great police officer. He's what we would hope all cops will be. But I've predicted to him that after a number of years, he's been there almost 5 years, you will see enough that could be better that you will feel yourself called to try and make it better. Because there's only so much you can do as an individual contributor to shape the way a group works, a department works, a community works. And so you will know it's the right time when you get to a place where you're like, God, first of all, you realize that there aren't a lot of great leaders. So you could do this. And you feel called to do it by having seen enough that you could fix. 1, 2, you got to go into it realizing that leadership is a pain in the butt, because it's all about other people's problems. Being an individual contributor is much easier in a way because you got to worry about yourself. That's why people are often not ready to be leaders until the pain of seeing bad leadership above them overcomes the comfort they have in being an individual contributor. But you have to go into it knowing that, look, this is about service, because people are going to come complain to me, whine to me. I'll be dealing with difficult struggles with leaders of other units, other departments. And so you have to be in a servant's mindset to be a leader. And so that's my best answer to the question. You'll know when it's time, when you feel it inside, that I actually think I can make a difference. And that will help you deal with the fact that it's a sacrifice to be a leader.
Well, thank you. That's really, really helpful for those of us out there who are thinking about taking that next step. So really appreciate that. I think we've got time for just one more quick question. One of our audience members has asked, what's next for you? And thanks you so much for sharing your experience, insight, and inspiring guidelines for ethical leaders. So what's next for you? What do you see on the horizon as your next contribution to our society?
That's a great question. Nothing in government. First of all, who would want me? I've managed to piss off both Democrats and Republicans. So what are you going to do? That's a certain, I have security that I will not be back in government. But I'm constantly looking for ways to be useful. I've been doing a lot of teaching at law schools. I'm just finishing my year at Columbia University. And I actually haven't figured out yet exactly what to do next. I'm giving a shot for the next few months at seeing whether I could be successful as a fiction writer, believe it or not. That I was pushed by my editor to consider writing legal fiction, legal thrillers. Think Scott Turow or I forget the other names, but
John Grisham.
Yes, Grisham, for example. And I resisted that idea because I thought that's kind of frivolous. And then a number of people have convinced me that you can actually teach in a pretty good way, maybe in a better way, through fiction than through nonfiction. And so my wife has great story vision, and I'm a pretty good writer. And so I think we're going to give that a shot. Now, that may not work out, and I'll have to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, but it won't be in government. It may well involve teaching something or volunteering in a nonprofit organization, but we'll see. I'm going to give the fiction writing a shot, see if that works out.
Well, thank you so much. Looking forward to reading whatever it is you decide to put out. Sure, it will be fascinating. So thank you so much for making the time to share your wisdom with us. I know that all of our audience members enjoyed it. I personally really enjoyed it and took notes on leadership, so I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and I hope everyone will join me in virtually thanking you. We will now have a break, and then we'll come back with our first panel. Thank you so much again, Mr. Comey.
Thanks.
Take care.